Hmm. I stepped through the front door of my own house and stopped cold. There were shoes by the entrance that didn't belong to me. A woman's flats. A pair of men's loafers, size 12 at least, scuffed at the toes. A child's sneaker kicked sideways against the baseboard. I stood there for a moment, just looking at those shoes. 63 years old, and I've learned that your gut tells you things before your brain catches up. My gut was saying something was very wrong. I set my bag down slowly. The house smelled different. There was food cooking somewhere, garlic maybe, and something sweet underneath it like a candle trying to cover something up. My house hadn't smelled like candles in 20 years, not since my wife Eleanor passed. I keep things plain, clean, the way she would have wanted. I called out, "Hello," a clatter from the kitchen. Then footsteps. Then my son's wife appeared in the hallway, and the look on her face told me everything before she said a single word. She wasn't surprised to see me. She was calculating. "Harold." She said my name like a statement, not a greeting. "We didn't think you'd be back this soon." I had been gone for 11 weeks. 11 weeks in Tucson, Arizona, helping my younger brother through a double hip replacement and the slow, miserable recovery that followed. 11 weeks with no one looking after my property here in Claremont, Virginia. My 4-bedroom colonial on 2.5 acres. The house I built my life in. The house where my son took his first steps and my daughter learned to ride a bike in the driveway. I hadn't asked anyone to watch it. I hadn't needed to. I own my home outright. The mortgage was paid off in 2019. The property taxes are current. There is no reason on God's green earth for another living soul to be standing in my kitchen at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening. "Didn't think I'd be back," I repeated, "to my own home." She crossed her arms. Her name is Patrice, and she has a way of standing that makes you feel like you're the one who's out of place. I've seen her do it to waitresses, to her own mother, to my son when he tries to disagree with her. She plants her feet and lifts her chin and waits for you to back down. I am 63 years old. I do not back down. "We've been staying here," she said. "Temporarily. We had some issues with our apartment, and we needed somewhere to go, and since the house was just sitting empty, where's my son?" She hesitated. "He's here. Get him." She didn't move right away. That half-second of defiance, I filed it away. My son's name is Patrick. He's 34, an IT project manager. Smart enough in his field, but with a particular weakness for avoiding hard conversations. Eleanor used to say he got that from me. Maybe she was right, but I've spent 63 years getting better at the hard conversations, and watching him walk into that hallway, eyes down, hands in his pockets, I could see he hadn't done the same work. "Dad?" He looked up. "I was going to call you." "When?" He didn't answer that. I looked around the hallway more carefully now. There were things on the walls that weren't mine. A framed print of some abstract painting, something with red splotches and a gray background. I don't own anything like that. I have photographs, family photographs, hunting prints, a watercolor of the Blue Ridge my wife bought at a craft fair in 1998. I looked at the nail holes where those frames used to hang. The watercolor was gone. "Where's the painting?" I asked. "The watercolor. Blue Ridge Mountains. Your mother bought it." Patrick opened his mouth. Patrice answered first. "We moved some things around to make it feel more livable. It's in storage. In my house. It's just a painting, Harold." Something moved in the doorway behind him. A man I didn't recognize stepped into the hall, carrying a coffee mug like he owned the place. He was around 60, heavy-set, wearing a Virginia Tech sweatshirt and 3 days of stubble. He nodded at me. "Harold," Patrice said, with the tone of someone about to introduce guests at a party, "this is my father, Eugene, and my mother, Sheila." A woman appeared behind him. Sheila was small and sharp-eyed, and she looked at me the same way her daughter did, measuring, calculating. I turned to my son. "Your wife's parents," I said, "are living in my house." He said nothing. "Patrick." My voice came out quieter than I expected. Sometimes the quiet is worse. "Look at me." He looked at me. "You let your wife's parents move into my house. Without asking me, without calling me. It was just temporary, Dad. Patrice's sister had a situation with their landlord and they needed to get out of their apartment fast, and we had the space." "You had the space," I said. "You're renting an apartment in Richmond. You don't have any space. This is my space. Eugene cleared his throat. Listen, I understand this looks bad. I'm not talking to you, I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. I don't know you. The silence after that was something you could have cut with a knife. I picked up my bag from where I'd set it down. I walked past all of them, down the hallway, to the back of the house where my office is. A small room with a desk, a filing cabinet, a gun safe, and a fold-out couch I've slept on more than I'd like to admit. I closed the door behind me. I sat down at my desk. I am not the kind of man who falls apart. Eleanor always said my emotional range ran from fine to quieter than usual, and she wasn't wrong. But sitting there, in that room, surrounded by the only things that were still in their right places, my files, my books, the photograph of Eleanor on our wedding day that I keep in the top left corner of the desk, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt the ground shifting. I pulled out my phone and called my daughter Lynette. She lives in Charlotte, 2.5 hours south. She's 38, practical, and she doesn't have the same trouble with hard conversations that her brother does. She answered on the second ring. Dad? You're back. I'm back, I said. I need to tell you something. Don't react yet. Just listen. I told her what I'd found. The silence on her end lasted about 4 seconds. I'm getting in the car, she said. You don't need to do that, Dad. Her voice had that edge it gets when she's done negotiating. I'm getting in the car. She hung up. I sat there another minute. Then I opened my filing cabinet, found the folder I keep for house-related documents, and pulled out the title deed. I've had this house in my name alone since 2003, when Eleanor and I did some estate planning after her first cancer scare. Everything is in order. Everything has always been in order. I also keep a security camera system. I installed it 2 years ago, after someone broke into 3 houses on my road in the same month. 4 cameras, motion-activated, connected to an app on my phone. I had turned off the notifications while I was in Tucson because the alerts were going off every time a deer walked through the yard and I was exhausted and grieving and didn't have the bandwidth. I opened the app. I scrolled back 11 weeks. What I found took me the better part of an hour to get through, and by the end of it I was very, very still. They had arrived on day 4. Not day 1. Day 4, like they'd waited a respectable amount of time before treating my house like a hotel. Patrick's car pulled into the driveway, and he and Patrice got out, and then 2 more cars came behind them, and Eugene and Sheila got out of one, and 2 young women I didn't recognize got out of the other. 6 people. 6 people moved into my house on day 4. I watched them carry boxes in. I watched them settle furniture I didn't own into my living room, a sectional sofa that swallowed half the space, a television mounted on the wall where my grandfather clock used to stand. I watched Eugene barbecuing on my back deck, using my grill, feeding a crowd of people I had never met. I watched a man in a truck come and take away my grandfather clock on day 19. I watched a different truck come 2 weeks later and take away the antique writing desk from the guest room, a Eastlake Victorian, solid walnut, that Eleanor had inherited from her grandmother. It had been appraised at around $12,000. I watched Eugene help the men load it onto their truck and exchange an envelope with the driver. Cash. I pulled out a notepad and started writing things down. The watercolor, gone. The grandfather clock, gone. The grandfather clock, gone. The writing desk, gone. 3 boxes I couldn't identify carried out in week 4. My mother's china, which I'd kept in the glass-fronted cabinet in the dining room, I checked the footage for that one specifically. Gone on day 31. Week 5. I kept writing. By the time Lynette knocked on my office door at 11:30 that night, I had 2 full pages of notes and a very clear picture of what had been happening in my house for nearly 3 months. She came in, looked at my face, looked at the notepad, and sat down on the fold-out couch. "How bad?" she said. "Bad." I showed her the footage. I showed her the notes. I watched my daughter's jaw get tighter and tighter the longer she sat there, until finally she put the phone down and pressed both hands flat on her knees. "Patrick knew," she said. "I don't know what he knew." "Dad," she looked at me straight. "He was there when the desk went out. He's on camera helping load it." That one landed. I won't pretend it didn't. "He's her husband," I said finally. "People make choices when they're afraid of their wives. That's not an excuse." "No," I said. "It's not. We didn't sleep much that night." I stayed in my office on the fold-out. Lynette camped out in the hallway in a camping chair she found in the garage, partly because the guest room, Her room, the room she grew up in, was occupied by Eugene and Sheila, and partly because she's her mother's daughter and sometimes standing in a hallway is its own kind of statement. In the morning, I made coffee. Just me. I made enough for one. When Patrice came downstairs and reached for a mug, I told her, calmly, that I'd appreciate if she and her parents made arrangements to find other accommodations within the next 72 hours. She stared at me. Harold, that's not 72 hours, I said. That's more than fair. We have rights. You can't just, this is my home, I said. My name is on the deed. I have never given you permission, written or otherwise, to be here. You are not tenants. You are trespassers. And everything that has left this house in the last 11 weeks, furniture, art, china, I have it on camera, time-stamped, with your father on video exchanging cash. I would very much like this to stay a family matter. Whether it does is up to you. She went very still. I drank my coffee. Eugene came downstairs 20 minutes later, saw my face, and apparently decided not to say anything. He poured himself a glass of water and went back upstairs. Lynette emerged from the hallway, poured herself coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with me like we were just having a regular Tuesday morning. The hard part was Patrick. He came down last, looked at Lynette, looked at me, didn't look at me, didn't look at Patrice. He sat down across from me and stared at the table. I know, he said. Tell me. He was quiet for a long moment. It started as just a weekend. She said you'd never know. You were going to be in Tucson for months. The house was just sitting there. And then her parents needed a place, and she said it would be temporary. And then, I don't know, Dad. I don't know how it became what it became. The desk, I said, your mother's desk. He closed his eyes. She told me it was going to an auction house for appraisal, that they'd get it back after. Patrick, I know. You watched them load it onto a truck. I know. His voice cracked on that one. I know what I did. I don't have an excuse. She said you had so much stuff you wouldn't notice, and by that point I was in so deep I didn't know how to stop. I held up my hand, not angry, just tired. I don't need the explanation right now. I need to know if you understand what you did. He looked up at me then. His eyes were red. It was Mom's desk, he said. I know what I did. We sat there for a while after that. Lynette, to her credit, did not say a word. I had called a property attorney the night before, a woman named Beverly who had handled Eleanor's estate, sharp and no-nonsense, the kind of lawyer who answers emails at 10 p.m. She had confirmed what I already knew. I owned the property outright. There was no lease, no written permission, no legal basis for anyone to claim tenancy in Virginia under those circumstances. 72 hours was more than the law required of me. She had also told me that the removal of personal property from a home by someone without legal authorization could constitute larceny in Virginia, particularly given the dollar amounts involved. The writing desk alone cleared the threshold for grand larceny. I did not share that with Patrice yet, but I had the option in my back pocket. Eugene came back downstairs at noon. This time he wanted to talk. Look, he said, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table without being invited. I think there's been some miscommunication. There hasn't been, I said. I understand you're upset. I'm not upset. I'm clear. He leaned forward. Harold, be reasonable. We've been here for months. We've been maintaining the property. You sold my furniture. He stopped. I have you on camera, I said, handing cash to the men who took my wife's writing desk. That desk was a family heirloom. It was appraised at $12,000. I also have you on camera the day my grandfather clock left, and the day 3 boxes went out in week 4 that I haven't fully inventoried yet, but I will. The color drained out of Eugene's face in real time. I watched it happen. Now, I said, you are welcome to leave voluntarily within the next 72 hours, and we can settle the matter of the missing property between family. Or you can choose to make this difficult, and I will file a police report this afternoon and let the courts sort out the value of what's been taken from this house. That choice is yours. But the only choice that isn't yours is whether you leave. He left the room. 72 hours later, on a Thursday morning, 2 cars backed out of my driveway. Eugene and Sheila's sedan. A U-Haul that Patrick drove with Patrice in the passenger seat. I stood on the front porch and watched them go. Lynette stood beside me, holding her coffee mug with both hands. You okay? She said, working on it. The hardest part wasn't what they'd taken. I want to be clear about that. Furniture is furniture. The writing desk was irreplaceable, yes. It was Eleanor's grandmother's, and there's a grief in losing it that I'll carry for a long time. But the hardest part was my son backing that truck out of my driveway, avoiding my eyes. We had talked again the night before, just the two of us after Lynette went to sleep, sitting on the back deck in the dark. The same deck where Eugene had barbecued steaks for people I'd never met. Patrick had asked me if I hated him. No, I said. You should. Probably. I looked out at the yard. But you're my son, and hating you doesn't get me my wife's desk back, so what's the point? He laughed a little at that. It was a sad laugh. I'm going to find it, he said. I'm going to track down who bought it, and I'm going to get it back. You don't have to do that. I do. He said it like he meant it. I need to do that. I didn't argue with him. He's been working on it since. Called me twice last week with updates. He's tracing the sale through a few second-hand dealers in the Richmond area. Says he has a lead on a shop that may have it. I don't know if he'll find it. But he's looking, and that means something. Patrice. He's not living with her anymore. He told me that a week after everything happened, he's in the spare room at a co-worker's place in Richmond while he figures out the next step. He said he's talking to a lawyer about the marriage. I didn't ask for details. That's his business and his pain, and I'm his father, not his judge. I filed a partial police report, not the full nuclear option. I did not pursue the grand larceny charges, partly because my attorney advised me that recovery of the desk was more likely through civil channels, and partly because filing those charges would have put Patrick in a complicated position as a witness to what he'd seen. I'm not willing to blow up my son's life. But Eugene knows the report exists, and he knows what's in it, and he knows I have every timestamp on file. The grandfather clock was found through a local antique dealer. They hadn't sold it yet. I paid a buyback fee, $350, and it's back in the hallway where it belongs. My mother's china is a different story. I'm still working on that one. The watercolor. Eleanor's painting, the Blue Ridge Mountains from the craft fair in 1998. I found it in the back of the guest room closet. Not stolen, just hidden behind a winter coat, like it had been shoved aside to make room for something else. When I pulled it out, the frame was scratched on one corner. I took it to a framer in town. He fixed it for $40 and I rehung it in the hallway. It's the first thing I see when I come through the front door now. I've been home for a little over 2 months since all of this. The house is quiet again. My quiet, not the wrong kind. I've gotten back into my routines. Coffee at 6, a walk along the fence line before the heat comes up, evenings reading or watching the news or calling Lynette, who checks in more than she used to. Patrick came for dinner 3 weeks ago. Just him, no one else. I made the same thing I used to make when the kids were small. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, the green bean casserole with the crispy onions on top. We sat at the kitchen table and ate and talked about nothing important for a while. And then we talked about some things that were important, and by the end of it, we were okay. Not all the way okay. These things take time, but the kind of okay where you can sit across from someone and mean it when you say you're glad they're there. He found the desk. He called me on a Saturday morning. I was out by the fence line, and he said he'd tracked it to an estate resale shop in Fredericksburg about an hour north. The shop had purchased it from a third-party dealer, so the trail from Eugene was muddied. But the desk itself was there, intact, with the original hardware. He bought it back out of his own money. Wouldn't let me pay. He drove it down in a rented truck, just him, and we carried it in together, through the front door, down the hallway, into the guest room where it had always lived. We set it down and I opened the drawer on the right side, which sticks a little because of the humidity, and there was a small tray inside still holding a dried-up pen and 2 paper clips that had been there since Eleanor's time. I stood there looking at those paper clips for probably longer than made sense. Patrick said, "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I'm all right." He put his hand on my shoulder for a moment, didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. There are things I've learned from this. Some of them I probably should have learned earlier. I have a property management contact now, a neighbor's son, a responsible young man named Alec who checks on the house when I travel. I've set up the camera alerts properly so they actually reach me. I've talked to my attorney about a few additional steps to make ownership documentation airtight against any future funny business, and I've learned to not confuse a person's weakness with their character. Patrick made terrible choices. He knows it. He's living with it. But the man who spent 2 months tracking down his mother's desk and drove it an hour south in a rented truck and carried it inside without asking for a thank you, that's the son Eleanor raised. That's still in there. Sometimes you lose things and get them back. Sometimes you lose things and don't. The writing desk is back in the guest room. The grandfather clock ticks in the hallway. The watercolor hangs by the front door. slightly new frame, same painting. Those mountains my wife loved from a craft fair almost 30 years ago. I walk past it every morning on my way to make coffee. It's enough. I've thought a lot about what made all of this possible. Not the betrayal itself. Betrayal has existed as long as people have. What I mean is what made it possible for me to walk back into that house, stand in my own hallway, and not lose myself. Part of it was something I've been building my whole life without realizing I was building it, the habit of keeping things in order. The deed in the file cabinet. The camera system installed and maintained. The documentation kept current. None of that felt heroic when I was doing it. It felt like paperwork. It felt like adult responsibility on a Tuesday afternoon. But when I needed it, it was all there. Every timestamp, every frame, every number I needed to know my ground and stand on it. That's what I'd call intelligence in the practical sense. Not book learning. The kind of intelligence that shows up as preparation before the crisis, not cleverness during it. And then there's the matter what I did and didn't do. I did not scream. I did not threaten. I did not let Eugene's posturing or Patrice's calculation pull me into a version of this situation where I was the one acting badly. I gave them 72 hours. That was more than the law required. It was the right amount of time for a man who wanted to sleep at night without regret. There's a kind of discipline in that, and knowing how much force to use, when to use it, and when to put the option back in your pocket and let the other person decide. A lot of people confuse being tough with being loud. They're not the same thing. Being tough is knowing what you have and not flinching. I had everything I needed. I didn't need to perform it. The hardest part, and I'll be honest about this because I think it matters, was Patrick. My son, watching him on that camera footage, helping load his mother's desk onto a stranger's truck, was the kind of pain that doesn't have a clean name, but I've lived long enough to know that people make terrible choices when they're afraid, and that the choice itself is not always the full story of who they are. Patrick was afraid of his wife. He was in over his head, and he made coward's choices, one after another, until he was so deep in the wrong that he couldn't find the door out. That's not excused by understanding it, but it's explained by it, and a man who spent 2 months quietly hunting down his mother's writing desk, who drove it down in a rented truck and wouldn't take a cent for it. That told me something too. People are not just their worst moment. Neither are they just their best one. What they are is what they do consistently, over time, when it costs them something. Patrick is still figuring that out. I believe he'll get there. What I know for certain is this. The things that protected me in this situation were not luck. They were years of showing up, keeping records, maintaining what I owned, and refusing to let my guard down on the details that matter. And when everything broke open, those habits held. The camera footage held. The deed held. My own composure held. Eleanor used to say that the way you build a life and the way you protect it are the same action. I didn't fully understand that when she said it. I think I do now. You don't prepare for the crisis. You just live the right way, consistently, and the preparation takes care of itself. The watercolor is back on the wall. The desk is back in the guest room. The grandfather clock ticks. That's enough.